Imagine a single waterway so powerful that it can change the price of goods in your local store. That's the Panama Canal, just 82 kilometers long, yet it connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and handles around 6% of all global maritime trade. For the United States, it's even more critical. About 40% of its container traffic flows through this narrow passage. Without it, ships would need to travel nearly 3 weeks longer around the southern tip of South America, making global shipping slower, riskier, and far more expensive. Today, this canal isn't just a shortcut for trade. It's becoming the center of a major geopolitical clash. Washington is demanding free passage for its ships. Panama is refusing. China's investments around the canal are raising eyebrows, and Donald Trump is even threatening to take it back. A canal built over a century ago may now decide the balance of global power. So how did a small Central American country find itself at the center of such a big storm? Let's break it down. To understand today's tensions, we need to look back at the history of the Panama Canal. The United States began building it in 1904 and completed it in 1914, carving an artificial waterway through Central America that forever changed global trade. Before the canal, ships had no choice but to travel around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, a dangerous, stormy route that added weeks to every voyage. The canal cut that time by more than half, saving money, fuel, and lives. By the late 20th century, control of the canal became a political issue. In 1977, the Torrijos-Carter treaties were signed, which guaranteed that the canal would remain neutral and open to ships of all nations. In 1999, full control was officially handed over to Panama, ending nearly a century of United States administration. Since then, the Panama Canal Authority, a Panamanian government agency, has managed its operations. But its importance has only grown. More than 13,000 ships pass through every year, carrying roughly 5 to 6% of the world's trade. For the United States alone, it handles nearly 40% of container traffic. That means disruptions here don't just affect Panama or the United States. They ripple across the entire world economy. For example, when drought reduced the canal's capacity in 2024, global shipping costs jumped, hitting even countries like Australia that don't use the canal directly. That's how tightly connected today's supply chains are. In short, the canal is much more than a local waterway. It's a global lifeline, and that's exactly why it has become the focus of today's great power rivalry. But almost immediately, Trump's tariff war sparked a global backlash. Trading partners who once saw the United States as a reliable ally began mobilizing against what they described as, economic aggression. The European Union convened emergency trade talks, while Canada, Mexico, Japan, and even long-standing allies like South Korea signaled they would not sit quietly. Behind the scenes, finance ministers and trade negotiators scrambled to coordinate a response. The concern wasn't just about tariffs, it was about precedent. If the world's largest economy could unilaterally rewrite trade rules, what would stop others from doing the same? The sense of betrayal ran deep. For many leaders, this was not simply about economics. It was about trust, sovereignty, and the balance of global power. This growing resistance set the stage for something the world hadn't seen in decades, a united front forming against U.S. trade policy. The pushback didn't take long to materialize. Within weeks, countries hit by Trump's universal tariffs began rolling out their own retaliatory measures. Canada targeted American steel and aluminum, slapping on tariffs that immediately raised costs for U.S. manufacturers. The European Union went after politically symbolic exports, bourbon from Kentucky, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and even orange juice from Florida. These weren't random choices. They were carefully selected to inflict pain on industries tied to Trump's political base. China, meanwhile, launched its own wave of countermeasures, striking at United States agriculture. Soybeans, pork, and corn, pillars of America's farming economy, suddenly became more expensive to sell abroad. In short, the retaliation wasn't just economic. It was strategic. Every tariff aimed not only to protect foreign industries, but also to send a clear political message back to Washington. If you escalate, we will respond in kind. Once the retaliation began, the trade war spread like falling dominoes. Tariffs that were meant to protect American industries quickly ricocheted across the global economy. Shipping routes slowed as companies scrambled to reroute supply chains. Ports in Los Angeles, Hamburg, and Shanghai saw fewer containers moving through, signaling just how deeply the conflict was cutting into global commerce. Major corporations were forced to recalculate their strategies. Automakers, for instance, couldn't rely on predictable supply chains anymore. Car parts that once crossed borders multiple times during production now carried added costs at every step. Tech giants faced similar hurdles, as tariffs hit everything from semiconductors to smartphones, making it harder to source critical components without raising prices. Meanwhile, smaller businesses, the ones without billion-dollar cushions, bore the heaviest burden. A family-run manufacturer in Ohio or a mid-sized exporter in Germany had no choice but to either absorb the higher costs or pass them on to customers. Either way, competitiveness suffered. The bigger picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just a United States versus the world issue. The trade war was reshaping how global trade itself functioned, pulling countries into a climate of uncertainty where long-term planning became nearly impossible. As the global trade war escalated, cracks started to show at home in the United States. Prices for everyday goods began creeping upward. Everything from washing machines to canned beer became more expensive because tariffs raised the cost of raw materials like steel and aluminum. Farmers faced some of the harshest blows. With China and other nations slapping tariffs on U.S. crops, millions of tons of soybeans sat unsold in silos across the Midwest. The government rushed in with bailout programs, funneling billions in aid to farmers just to keep them afloat. But even with subsidies, many family farms were forced to close. Their international markets lost to competitors like Brazil and Argentina. Manufacturers weren't immune either. Companies like General Motors and Harley-Davidson openly warned that tariffs were driving up their costs, forcing them to shift production overseas or cut jobs. Ironically, the very industries tariffs were supposed to protect began to feel the squeeze. For Wall Street, the uncertainty was, well, toxic. Markets swung wildly with every new tariff announcement or countermeasure. Investors knew that a prolonged trade war could choke growth, weaken corporate profits, and honestly push the United States economy toward recession. By this point, it was clear that Trump's tariff wall wasn't just reshaping global trade. It was, in fact, rewriting the United States economy itself. While the United States economy wrestled with inflation and market jitters, the trade war was quietly redrawing the global balance of power. Countries that once leaned heavily on American trade began looking for alternatives. China deepened its economic ties with Russia and other Asian partners, creating parallel trade networks that bypassed the United States entirely. In Europe, leaders began pushing harder for economic self-reliance. The European Union accelerated plans to boost local industries, invest in renewable energy, and reduce dependence on United States imports. Canada and Mexico, long tethered to the American market, sought new agreements with Europe and Asia to shield themselves from Washington's unpredictable policies. Perhaps the most striking outcome was the rise of regional alliances. Trade blocs like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Asia suddenly gained momentum, offering stability at a time when the United States was, well, driving instability. For many nations, it was a chance to diversify away from America's orbit and secure new supply routes. This wasn't just about money, it was about influence. Every time the United States escalated, other nations had more reason to collaborate with each other. The result? A world inching toward a multipolar trade order, where Washington's dominance was no longer guaranteed. By the end of this unfolding trade war, one lesson stood out. Tariffs may start as an economic tool, but their ripple effects reshape politics, industries, and even global alliances. What began as Trump's bid to, protect American jobs ended up driving up consumer prices, destabilizing markets, and pushing United States allies and rivals alike to find ways around Washington's economic reach. The United States, once the anchor of global trade, now faced the unintended consequence of accelerating a shift toward a multipolar world, where power and influence are shared, not dominated by a single country. In that sense, the tariff wall didn't just redraw supply chains, it redrew the map of global economics. For ordinary people, the story is just as important. The price of a car, a smartphone, or even a bag of groceries is no longer shaped only by local factors, but by a web of global decisions, retaliations, and alliances. Every consumer, farmer, and worker becomes part of this larger chess game. So here's the question. If tariffs are meant to protect, but end up isolating, is the cost worth it? That's what every nation and every citizen has to ask as trade wars become the new normal. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like the video, share it with others who care about how global economics affects daily life, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis. The trade war isn't over, and understanding it is the first step in preparing for what comes next.